to understand this world and the science behind it is to understand and appreciate the intelligent design and the God behind it. Our topic today is Sir Isaac Newton. There is no science without God. To begin with, let me just share this from the Urantia book. Materialism reduces man to a soulless automation and constitutes him merely an arithmetic symbol finding a helpless place in the mathematical formula of an unromantic and mechanistic universe. In the times that we're in right now, there's a sense of wanting to reach out to God, but then there's also sometimes this sense of, well, I need to use my logic and I need to use my reason. And I'm not talking about us, you rancher people, but I'm talking about the larger world. There's this push pull between faith and reason. And this is condensed in this whole idea of materialism. Not materialism in terms of being materialistic and wanting money, but materialism in terms of this feeling of I have to compromise logic to have faith in God. And for some reason, as we'll explore in this presentation, Isaac Newton is seen as a large part of how we got to that today. But it is unfounded, as we're going to explore here. Materialism essentially denies the existence of any intelligent design in nature and any ultimate purpose to human existence. So when you take God out of the equation, when you say this is a random, chaotic universe, and there is no intelligent design, there is no God there, what you get is a purposeless existence. And these concepts have infiltrated society today. And there is a sense of hopelessness. There is a sense of, you know, if there is no God, if there is no higher power, then you don't have a reason for living. You were just a random accident. And that is the situation we have today. You either follow science and then unless you are a very devout believer already, but if you follow science, you're going to come up with the conclusion that God isn't a part of it. And this all can be traced back to a misunderstanding of what we could call the founder of modern science, Isaac Newton himself, actually believed and actually wanted to put forward. We have over here a document from uh, the Age of Enlightenment, the Age of Reason in the 18th century in France. And these ideas of materialism ended up giving the idea that we as human beings are no more than just flesh and blood. There's no spirit, there's no soul, there's nothing like that. We are just flesh and blood, and we are a machine. And if we extend that idea from way back then in France to today, I'm talking from Seattle, Washington, 2025, the land of Microsoft, the land of Amazon, the land of all these AI companies, these companies that are, relying on AI so much, uh, that's the epitome of, okay, we can replace consciousness with a machine. The talk of upgrading humans to be able to merge with machines and so forth. So Bruce Lipton, I'm sure many of you know about him. He wrote some wonderful books, Biology of Belief, and so forth. But he, as a notable scientist today, he also is caught up with this whole idea that Newton is the one responsible for this separation of God from nature. And so in this quote, he says, one myth perception is our continued emphasis on a Newtonian materialistic world, which by definition emphasizes the primacy of matter and somewhat ignores or minimizes the influence of the immaterial part of the universe. And I grew up to believe that too, like Bruce Lipton, like pretty much anybody educated in the school system today, we're going to come up with that idea that this is what Newton believed. So, Isaac Newton, just a quick overview of him. He's considered to be the greatest scientist who ever lived. He was born in 1643, the same year, very important, as we'll discuss in a moment, the same year that Galileo died. And Isaac was an Englishman, he was a mathematician and natural philosopher, a physicist who served as a professor of mathematics at Cambridge University from 1669 to 1701. And he was born on Christmas Day, and his father died before he was born. Anyway, he discovered the law of universal gravitation, the law of motion, developed calculus, and discovered that white light is composed of a full spectrum of colors. He summarized his first discoveries in Principia, a book that came out in 1687, and many consider that book to be the greatest scientific book ever written. Interestingly enough, he was very much like us with COVID, where everything shut down and you had to go to your homes. Well, there was the plague, and he had to leave university, leave Cambridge, and he had to go home for 2 years. And it was during those times that some of his greatest discoveries were made. So interesting to note that when he learned on his own outside of the system that produced, pretty typical type of conclusions. When he thought outside of the box, he came up with groundbreaking ideas that we now call the foundation of science, modern science. This book, Newton and the Culture of Newtonianism, I'm just going to read a fairly long quote, but I think it's going to be interesting. The people of 17th century England organized their lives by the rising and setting of the sun and by the rhythms of the seasons. Many were deeply religious. Only a bare majority could sign their names to a contract, and still fewer could read and understand it. The Newtonian universe, organized by Newton's physics and celestial mechanics, permitted an entirely new approach to nature. Nature's wonders became knowable, no longer simply awesome or terrifying. Newtonian science, in the form of applied mechanics, fed directly into the Industrial Revolution, which began in England in the last quarter of the 18th century. And this is what Newton believed. Nature revealed the work of the great mathematician, and Newton sought to know God through that great mathematician. Out of these lonely speculations arose scientific discoveries that helped to usher in an age where Newton's God seemed increasingly irrelevant. Such a world Newton had never intended. Indeed, had Newton lived in the late 18th century, Newton would have been horrified by men who thought more about capital and machines than they thought about their creator. And so that's to give us a sense of how groundbreaking, how pivotal his ideas came to be. Now, it liberated people, it brought people to a new level of awareness, and it released the control of the totalitarian control of the church. But at the same time, it had these unintended consequences because people looked at the fact that now you could understand more of how the world worked, and they took that as a sign that we didn't need God. And that's not what Newton believed. As we'll see in this presentation, the motivation for Newton to explore this whole world and understand things through a mathematical lens, a scientific lens, was to bring honor to God, was to say how great you are. that you have such order and symmetry and such beauty, truth, beauty, and goodness. Not to say, okay, great, we know all these things. We don't need you now, God. So, in his unpublished writings, and we're going to get to the whole topic of unpublished writings here in a second. In his unpublished writings, we learn that Newton believed that materialism should be rejected because it was a path to atheism. And this is a book by a Newton scholar, Betty Jo Teeter Dobbs, and she wrote a number of books on him. So, the topic of Newton's unpublished manuscripts. So, in 1936, a whole bunch of unpublished writings surfaced. They were passed through different people that were associated with Newton after his death, and they were presented to at this auction in 1936. And these papers had been just basically kept hidden since his death in 1727. There were over 5 million words just on theological matters, especially prophecy, church history, and doctrine. In total, there were 10 million words that he never published. So when these papers came to be presented for auction at Sotheby's, interestingly enough, none of the major universities showed up to bid. It was private individuals that were interested for various reasons in bidding on these papers. And they actually went into the hands, when all was said and done and the auction was over, of about 36 different private individuals. So some of those papers, still to this day, are completely unknown. They are just in the hands of certain people who haven't brought them forward for public awareness. But a good chunk of them ended up in the hands of a Jewish scholar who ended up, after his passing, his wife um, uh, gave those documents to a Hebrew university in Israel. So that was one chunk of manuscripts. And then a whole other group of manuscripts were bought up by an economist named Keyes. And he felt that these manuscripts were so important to understanding the mind of this greatest scientist known to history, that it was a complete shame that these weren't brought out into the public. So he donated his manuscripts, which were about 5 million words, that he bought at this auction, to Oxford University. And now those manuscripts, you can go online and you can actually search and you can see a image of Newton's writing, the actual writing on paper from back then, and then there will be a translation next to it. So the Newton Project is at Oxford University. It was created in 1998 as a result of this donation. And the project has transcribed so far 4 million words of Newton's unpublished writings, primarily in physics, mathematics, and theology. So let's talk about why Newton didn't publish his writings on these topics. Well, during the medieval period and early modern periods, the Christian Church, the Church of Rome, um, fiercely defended the existence of the soul and our place in the cosmos, our place in the universe, and imposed very strict boundaries on how these things could be understood. So, stepping outside of that doctrine meant that you were a heretic, you could be imprisoned, you could be executed. This led to self-censorship of Isaac Newton and other people who valued their life. So Isaac Newton was born on the day that Galileo died. He no doubt heard about the terrible way that Galileo was treated by the church, who merely suggested that the Earth wasn't the center of the universe, that the Earth rotated around the sun. For that, he was tortured, he was imprisoned, and his books were banned by the Church of Rome. So you can understand, with that precedent being set, Newton was a little shy of publishing these things. He would have lost his seat at Cambridge, his professorship. He would, but much worse, quite probably. So he didn't publish these. But why did he put all of these very important ideas into writing to be saved that we could now find today? Well, it is believed that he knew at some point in the future there was going to be a time where his ideas could be known and they would be found as they have more recently. Interestingly enough, what I just mentioned is echoed in the Urantia book. So the Urantia book says modern secularism has been fostered by two worldwide influences. The father of secularism was the narrow minded and godless attitude of 19th and 20th century so called science, atheistic science. The mother of modern secularism was a totalitarian medieval Christian church. Secularism had its inception as a rising protest against the almost complete domination of Western civilization by the institutional Christian church. Now, Newton was a very deeply religious man, as we'll see, very much believed in God and was identified as Christian, but he did believe that the Church of Rome had altered the original teachings of the Christian church. So he believed that after the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, that things changed. And he didn't agree with, for instance, the idea of the Trinity. He didn't believe that that Jesus was equal to God. He believed Jesus was Christ, but he believed that Jesus was subservient to God. So, and he saw some of these ideas like the Trinity as not the original essence of original Christianity. He saw this as just one of many, many examples that he criticized the Church of Rome for. And he felt that they had changed Christianity. He also felt that there was more of a place of a balance between science and religion in early Christianity. And he felt that that had been obscured after 4th century as well. So he railed against the Catholic Church in his writings, and he felt for good reason. In some of his writings, he talked about the fact that because of this separation of religion and science that happened after the 4th century, uh, that there was only going to be a slowly downward turn of society, that we would become so divorced from who we really are that this materialism would take over. And he believed that the end of the world would happen in 2060. He said that back in the 17th century. That's not too long from now. He believed also, and one of the reasons why he left all of these millions of words for us today, he believed that humanity could turn course, get back on track, and not go downhill. The world does not need to end, but there can be a new resurgence, a new rebirth of humanity if we turn back to an understanding that God is not separate from science. And what he believed was an early version of Christianity, that God and science are compatible and need to be understood together. So to reject atheism, to reject materialism. Okay, so I mentioned that John Maynard Keynes he was the economist who bought up a good portion. I mean, he happened to be an economist. That's kind of irrelevant, but he was the person who bought up a good portion of Newton's manuscripts in 1936 and felt they were so important for humanity that he donated them to what has become the Newton Project. Anyway, the Royal Society of London did an event in 1946 to invited various speakers just to celebrate the life of Newton. They asked Maynard Keynes, who had read all of these unpublished works of Newton because he owned them, to make a speech. Unfortunately, John Maynard Keynes passed away a few months before that event honoring Newton, but his brother delivered this speech that he had already written. And here are some of the few things he said in that. He said, "I believe that Newton was different from the conventional picture of him. In the 18th century and since, Newton came to be thought of as the first and greatest of the modern age of scientists, a rationalist, one who taught us to think on the lines of cold and untinctured reason. I do not see him in this light. I do not think that anyone who has pored over the contents of that box, which he packed up when he finally left Cambridge in 1696, and which, through partially dispersed, have come down to us, can see him like that." So he's talking about these unpublished writings that Newton did not send out because he feared, you know, the retribution from the church. But what Maynard Keynes is saying is that if we s- absorbed this material and understood the mind of this man, we would realize he was not the picture that was painted of him at all, and that still exists today. What Newton was doing when he was pursuing his mathematical inquiry, his understanding of science, was seeking evidence of God's action in nature. And so this is in Newton's own words. Well, actually, I'll read it, but it's not even in it's in his English, right? So when I wrote my treatise about our system, I had an eye upon such principles as might work with considering men for the belief of a deity, and nothing can rejoice me more than to find it useful for that purpose. Now, if you happen to look on the Newton Project online on that Oxford or so forth, you're going to find when you look up his writings that are translated, they're going to be in this antiquated English. But really, what we're saying here is that he was looking for God's action in nature. And one of the things that Newton has been accused of is that he's been accused of being a deist, which is an idea that was, you know, associated with the Age of Reason, the Age of Enlightenment, and that's the idea that, yeah, there was a God. It's not like it's just a mechanistic universe that's just random and chaotic. Deism is suggesting that there is a God, but God is like an absentee landlord, set things up and then walked away. And it you Newton is not a deist, he's a theist. So he believed that, yes, God set it all up, but God did not walk away. It's funny to say things like that when but God is not an absentee landlord. God is very much involved in creation, and, that's not the way that Newton has been framed. So Newton's quest, and this is from a wonderful book, by Sarah Dry from 2019 called The Newton Papers: The Strange and True Odyssey of Isaac Newton's Manuscripts. It's a wonderful book that talks about how we found the manuscripts, how they came to light, and some of the, you know, workings in terms of who got what portion and, how they got distributed and everything. Anyway, to distill all of that down to this is Newton wanted to find order and design in what appeared to be chaos. He did not believe this was a chaotic universe. He believed it was order, and that's what prompted him to, you know, discover what he discovered. And so this paper that's online today, it's actually a chapter out of a book, but here we have it. Newton's rejection of the Newtonian worldview, the role of divine will in Newton's natural philosophy. The Newtonian worldview, which is named after his name, came to be more or less about an atheistic worldview of a mechanistic universe that had no need for God. And, that's what I learned in school. That's what many kids are still learning today in school, and it just ain't true. From the same paper, here's just a quote, and this is the man that wrote this paper. He is, still alive today. He's a science historian. So Newton did not practice the radical separation of science and theology that has come to characterize the modern world, and in terms of himself, he is so often depicted. So that's pretty much as straightforward as we can get. And this is again, just a little tidbit from the book, The Newton Papers by Sarah Dry, and she talks about this, English scientist and philosopher who, is not that well known, but he did, contribute greatly. Anyway, it was his belief that science can bring its practitioners close to the mind of God, and it was Isaac Newton who got the closest. So, I thought a very lovely way of framing it. And this Newton scholar here has said this: Newton's natural theology does not portray the clockwork universe often associated with Newtonianism, but a powerful God of dominion. And this is from the same scholar. It was Newton's desire to construct a natural philosophy that demonstrated that nature was contingent on the existence of God, whether this be the beauty and symmetry seen in creation or the grounding of absolute space and time in God's omnipresence and eternal duration. Newton's God of dominion and his view of nature as dependent on God are two halves of a whole. So, this is the second most important book that he wrote and Newton wrote. And here's one of the final statements in the very end of that book. He said, "This most elegant system of the sun, planets, and comets could not have arisen without the design and dominion of an intelligent and powerful being." So, from the Urantia book, at the time of this revelation, the prevailing intellectual and philosophical climate of both European and American life is decidedly secular, humanistic. For 300 years, Western thinking has been progressively secularized. Religion has become more and more a nominal influence, largely a ritualistic exercise. The majority of professed Christians of Western civilization are unwittingly actual secularists. So, you know, why is it worth looking into the hidden manuscripts of, or this lost knowledge of Isaac Newton? It's worth resurrecting it, it's worth bringing it forth because it had profound implications on our society. This misunderstanding of what he was putting forth set things in motion and led us to what the Urantia book is commenting on here today. The Urantia book says, even after materialism and mechanism have been more or less vanquished, the devastating influence of 20th century secularism will still blight the spiritual experience of millions of unsuspecting souls. So, in some contexts, it's acknowledged that Newton was a Christian or Newton believed in God. But it's very, very rarely acknowledged that that just wasn't a personal side pursuit. It was the underpinning of everything he did. And if we brought that into our educational system, where students growing up could realize that to understand this world and the science behind it is to understand and appreciate the intelligent design and the God behind it. And, it lends a lot of credence to realize the foremost thinker on these subjects came at it from that perspective. So, it's a important history to recover, and the Urantia book is pointing out the consequences of this loss.
Thank you, Jenny. That was great. Um, Joanne.
So I know you're a trained psychologist, and I'd love for you to tell me. I think you mentioned to me once before about some of your younger clients and this pervasive feeling of hopelessness.
Oh.
I mean, it's a thing, isn't it? I mean, aren't suicide rates at an all-time high? And I just can't even imagine what I mean, I was raised in a Catholic school, so I had that formation of, God. But I think so many kids, including my own, have not.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate that there is this division today, and there is this sense that, if you're, I live in Seattle, and there's this, it's very secular. It's the most secular city in the country, and it's also the most educated. And so there is this sense that if you're intellectual, you're not going by this blind faith stuff. And that is such a sad idea that we have reduced it down to, well, you know, there's this compromise that you have to have between the two. If we understood someone like Newton, who's a brilliant, brilliant man, really felt like his inspiration and everything came from God. And what a difference, as you're mentioning, Joanne, is so true. What a difference this would make for young people if they knew that there was a divine design behind the whole universe. They were created for purpose. This is not a random, chaotic universe spinning out of control where everything is, random and you don't matter and you're not here for a reason. Yeah, that type of thinking leads to hopelessness, leads to, if you follow it long enough, it can lead to suicide ideation. When you pull God out of the equation, you pull hope, you pull meaning, you pull purpose. Now, thankfully, there is a huge Christian revival. After Charlie Kirk's death, there was a huge Christian revival in Washington State. So, you can only go so far into the hopelessness of these concepts for people to long for. I can't take it anymore. I gotta look for some God. There's gotta be a God. But how much less humanity would have suffered if we had this all along? But I will say, as the Urantia book says, the reason there was a purpose to going along the secular route too. There was an overbearing totalitarian control by the Church of Rome on everything. I mean, imprisoning Galileo for suggesting a scientific idea. So this allowed people to pull back from that overbearing control of the medieval church, but they pulled back and they course corrected too much. And so now I believe we're in this really powerful time in history where we're searching for answers, we're getting new information, but we're also realizing things are so chaotic in the world. Things are so bad. If we don't ground ourselves in God, what else do we have?
Thanks, Jenny. Yeah, and right, like people are looking, even though whether I mean, a lot of them are turning back to religion in some form, but a lot of them are turning to whatever else they can too, right? To try and fill that need, and it's very well. I don't need to tell everybody here. Halbert.
So thank you for your presentation, first of all, for putting all that together and giving us a sense of context and perspective on how certain currents in social evolution have been evolving. Uh, what it reminded me of was because of the issue of how he was not feeling free because, as you put, the overbearing totalitarian control by the church. That issue is a free speech issue, right? He didn't feel free to speak. And then, where we're at today with freedom of speech issues and so forth, and how it all just sort of cuts right to the core of who is being unprogressive, how, and about what. We've had sort of this dichotomous thought, like you're either on the side of God or you're not on the side of God. You're materialistic or, you're theistic. There's been so much secularism within the church that we now have the church overlapping with highly contentious political issues that involve freedom of speech and what you're free to say or not say.
I'll turn. I mean, it is true when you look. Let's just use the old example, so not have to talk about current topics. But if the old church had not been so worried about what the planets were doing, right? I mean, it's not political. I mean, it's not spiritual to say Jupiter has moons, but the church had made it a part of their faith, really outside of probably their mission. And then when someone contradicted it, then it's not just, oh, well, we found some moons around Jupiter. It's you're threatening our authority. It's all wrapped up. So that's a lesson for every religious movement in terms of what they bring in the fold, right? I mean, it's one of the great things about the Urantia book. It actually doesn't take positions on many, many things. And Jesus, of course, never did. And that's a good lesson because otherwise you get right in the mud with all the pigs, right? Josh.
So my question is about the cult of materialism they talk about. I feel like that's like the main problem in society right now. You can't even think of yourself without it. What do you say when you meet someone? I like this, I do that, I like this food, I like this team. And they always talk about when the cult of materialism has passed, then we can move forward. But I feel like, do you have a timeline, like in actual years, numbers that you've ever thought of for like how long would the cult of materialism last? Because I feel like it's our whole society.
First of all, I'm very grateful for the Urantia book because one of the things that Urantia book does for me, it reminds me that there are so many different celestial helpers in the, helping us, right? Personally, I believe we need it because I think the greatest threat that we have right now in terms of the topic of materialism is artificial intelligence. And I have gone down the rabbit hole of looking at how far it really is that isn't really spoken about in the media. And you wouldn't really know if you just download ChatGPT. But if you really look at behind the scenes, one of the people that's been blowing the whistle on this about how far advanced it is the founder of Apple Computers, Steve Wozniak, the co-founder. And he has a group in Silicon Valley that is speaking out against this. And really, if you look at some of the ways that these billionaires are speaking about the rise of AI, they intend for us to be no much more than a puppet dictated by the machine. And so we are subservient to it. And we are, basically are no longer individual thinking people. And I mean, that is the biggest threat. And, I see it slowly becoming so almost seductive to people where, oh, yeah, of course I've downloaded on my phone. Of course I ask it everything. Of course it's so helpful. That's one step to outsourcing your thinking. If I relied on, stuff that is very important to me about history, on just quizzing AI, through any of the, search engines, what happened when, it's 100% filtered to a certain bias, and we are reconstructing our memory of history, our memory of the world, and our view of the world through a commissioned product by certain, oligarchs who have a certain atheistic agenda. I don't know how we get out of that one because it's so strong and it's so overpowering for people. Of course, I mean, I know people who it's their friend now.
Mhm.
That's their friend. And we're not talking about 20-year-olds. I'm talking about people in assisted living that are in the Urantia movement. So it's their buddy. So, I think that whole topic is like, if I didn't read the Urantia book, I would feel hopeless. But when I read the Urantia book, I feel like we have so many helpers. They know we're going down a bad path. They're showing, I believe they're kind of help. They know we're at that critical point of having to assert our own, spiritual authority in this stuff.
Thank you.
Well,
Yeah, I just waited for time frame too. Do you have like just to
well,
finish it up?
Newton
Yeah.
said 2060. So we've
Newton
Oh,
got
said
okay.
2060.
so we've got
That is
36.
true.
I
Good
mean,
point.
35.
listen, and how did he get that? He mathematically worked on the Book of Revelations, but okay, so it would be super interesting. Look at what Newton said, and then compare that to what the founder of Apple Computer said about AI ending the world. Because I mean, we're talking about ending what it means to be a biological human who has a connection with God. As soon as you give your consciousness over to that, you no longer have that connection with God. I mean, right now, people are, instead of like praying and meditating, God, what would you like me to do that? They're asking AI. And these are intelligent people that I know in my life that believe in God, but they're asking AI.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
anyway.
no, even, I mean, obviously, I think a lot of us know in our community, right? There's these AI tools that people are using to help explain the book or understand. And we think, oh, well, that's just a helpful kind of a reference. It's nice, answer a question, find a quote. But there's people doing that in all religious traditions, right? There's the AI chatbot Jesus of every stripe that you can imagine, not just, Urantia version. Um, and then on the news yesterday, there's an app that you can or this you like film an old person. You take a 5-minute video of your mother, so after she dies,
Yeah.
you can talk to her still, and the AI will now come through her, and her grandkids can continue to talk to her over the years. I mean, it's really quite
That's
something, right?
horrible.
It's a very confusing world for young people to grow up in. Very
Right.
confusing. If they don't have themselves grounded in a real connection with God outside of AI, it's incredibly you won't be able to tell the difference between reality and fiction. Like that's where we're
Right.
going.
And
And
that's a
if
cult
Okay.
of
you are,
materialism, I think. Anyway, yeah. So we have a long way
Okay.
to go still.
Yeah.
yeah, and I mean,
All
I
right.
won't use AI to look up the book because it only needs to start mistelling the truth one or two times slightly, and then you have a shifted book,
Yeah.
right? That's why I won't read a Bible on my phone because you just need to
Mm.
shift the words a little bit, and over time it becomes a different book. I want a paper book in my hand of the Bible, you
Yeah.
know?
Okay. Thanks, Doreen.
Yes, thank you. Wonderful presentation, Jenny. It's so funny speaking about all these things. I meet so many people that are hungry for truth and that of all ages, doesn't matter. And it's just like as Jesus passed by, you have the Spirit living within you. The adversity has to be there for you to hunger, right? To search for meaning. And I believe once you open up that doorway, there is a plan for everybody's life. It's just opening the doorway. If you just close it off and think that I know I see people walking into trains. They don't even know the train is coming. They're just blind to signals on the streets. I live in the city, so I see a lot of things. So I was thinking that if things get hard enough, and I believe it'll get worse before it'll get better, people sometimes that adversity has to come to say, enough is enough, I need something else. And groups are forming, whether you know it or not. It's just not advertised. You see, the marketing of materialistic things leads people to think everything is materialistic. No, it's perfectly, I guess, the nurturing of a good parent. When you have good family, it's that foundation that sets your life in order. I was brought up an atheist, and I was suicidal at some point because I didn't have good parents. And I thought, why do we exist?
what's the world about? This is ridiculous. It's so evil, and people are mean to each other. But then, that opening up, because I didn't believe in God. Who is God? What does he do? I was led step by step by step. I cannot tell you how amazing God is, and the angels, and they come and they lead you. Well, but you have to open up and ask. You have to say, and I said to God one day, I said, if you are real, show me yourself. Show me your personality. Bingo, my third eye opened up, and there was this beautiful being and smiled to me. And that was the beginning. And it was just God leading me, but over a very long period of time to transform, you to recognize there is so much beauty and goodness and love in the world.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you for that sharing, Doreen. That's really amazing. From atheist to that. I mean, what a beautiful story. Thank you.
Yeah, there's the reality of our experience, which we all have these great experiences, and then what we see on TV and our phones and everything, right? And that's not reality, but that's what we're told is, and that's the disconnect. Anna.
You already know about this, I'm sure, Jenny, but I came across this very recently, a book by Stephen Myers called Return of the God Hypothesis. And I saw him give a little talk on YouTube, and I was impressed. So anyway, I just thought I'd bring that to everybody's attention. He's got speeches on YouTube, and I even ordered the book. So he's a scientist, and he's proving not just the intelligent design theory, but also God. He uses the word God. Wow. So anyway, just thought I'd point that out. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna.
Thanks.
Yeah, that is a great book. Thank you.
Judy.
Thank you, Jenny. This was really interesting. And I would just make 2 points. I remember at BSU being completely struck in my Western Civ class when the professor said, you have to stop to contemplate that history, up until a certain point in time, not that long ago, was written solely from the perspective of men. So I make that point to say that even the books that we've used in those dusty old library shelves have their bias and their perspectives that do not encompass all of everything.
Right.
I don't really understand AI totally. I think there can't be anything humans create that doesn't have bias. Somebody's got to be doing the background. But I think that we should remember that fact when we think about the dusty shelves. I also think that for Urantia book readers, it would be wise for people who've read the book for a long time, many times, studied it, to do summarizations from AI, because that's the only way to really compare what comes up. If it polls, I've seen a few things, but not very much. But it would be curious for us to look at that and see how close it actually comes to an individual's understanding of what they've read over the years. Just those 2 comments. Thank you again. I've enjoyed this.
Yeah. I love what you said about history. It's true.
Thanks, Judy. Yeah, I won't comment because as a man, but the other point that that you made is that at Newton's time, everyone believed in God. I mean, there was no. I mean, yeah, you might have had an isolated person who had a weird thought atheist, but it was just all the philosophers really up until really you have to get to Nietzsche and Marx and people like that later who were not simply trying to find God, right? No matter how they did it. Newton put the crack in the wall with mechanism, but it wouldn't make any sense to him at all that he would deny God. And it's hard for us to put ourselves back in that mindset where that was just a given, right? Whatever you were explaining God. Now we're in the opposite mindset. If you're doing any explaining, you can't be talking about God because God's not explainable. That's sort of the underlying premise that's used to segregate everything. And we have to get ourselves out. And like this book that Anna mentioned, people are coming around. So wait a minute, I don't care how technical you're going to get. There's a lot of things that just don't make sense without. And the more you learn, the more, if you stay honest about it, the more you don't know. And we're finding the universe is even bigger than our theories can handle. So, well, gee, you know what? But it's shaking people up, just like it happened 300 years ago. But hopefully, we come out of it okay. Joanne.
You know how in the world of addiction, you talk about somebody has to bottom out before they can really get help, and I speak from not personal experience, but friends I had, back in the 60s who, a bunch of rich kids who got into drugs because they had plenty of money and, what they had to go through in order to finally, get clean and how horrible that is. And then the other thing I thought of, I think the challenge now is, a generation of people that really aren't reading much anymore. I mean, I think our age, we're still reading, but I think a lot of I don't know, Tim, you've got a son. I mean, many of us have kids.
Oh no, I can't get him to read a book.
Yeah.
It's amazing. I mean, he's
Mine
very
wouldn't
smart,
even
but
read
it's very
Harry
hard. Yeah.
Potter. They wouldn't even read Harry Potter. I mean, one of them
Yep.
read The Hitchhiker's Guide. And that was about it. So I don't know. What do we do with that? I mean, Judy, are your kids reading? I don't know. It's interesting.
My daughter is an avid reader. My son, not so much. He likes to listen to books. My grandkids don't read as much as my kids read. So, I mean, they love their devices. So there you go. That's where they get their
Right.
information.
I think it's hard. I think even those of us who are lifelong readers probably don't read as much as we used to, right? Because we spend time, on other places. We think we're reading, but we're just getting started. Anyway, Alfonso.
I was just going to ask about a sample of secularism, in humans and in people, what's the difference? I mean, like I live in Texas and there's the Bible Belt here, they all talk about Bibles, religious and blah, blah, blah. But are they, how can I say that there's secularism? Because they worry more about politics or health or other things. That's what they call secularism, being seculars, not religious. But that was the question I wanted to ask, about a sample of what a secularism, but because I didn't have the concept, very clear, But that's all. I'm very happy to be with you, and I'm very happy to be with this conference. I always liked everything you put up. Thank you. God bless you.
I mean, in terms of what we're talking about in this conversation, materialism, going along with the same idea as secularism, and that is basically denying the existence of God. Whatever domain you're talking about, whether it's politics or whatever, but it's the idea that, the world is physical, the world is material, and there isn't the soul, there isn't spirit, there isn't the divine. And, so when I'm talking about the place that I live in is secular, people are not that inclined to believe in a higher power. And yeah, so I hope that helps.
Yeah. Now, you also raised the issue, Alfonso, that you have people who are saying they believe in God, so that does not fit the definition of secular, but yet maybe they're very materialistic, maybe they're very, very political, maybe they're very whatever. Those aren't. You can be both, right? You can be spiritual and you can be very active in whatever other way, but only the person really knows inside what is your true motivation. Are you really being guided by your belief in God, your belief in higher spiritual things, and then you're taking action as best you think? Or are you really being driven by the dollar and what your neighbor has, and power or control, and you're using religion as a excuse, right? None of us are perfect. It's always a little bit of a mixture, but I think that's a little bit what you're seeing. So just speaking for myself, I'd rather have someone who's at least honestly motivated by a belief in God, maybe making the wrong decision on a temporal issue, than somebody who's maybe making a decision I agree with and denies that existence, because ultimately we're all going to make wrong decisions, right? The decisions are going to play out, but the God thing, you can't replace it if it's gone. So that's just my personal take on it. Doreen?
Yeah, so we all want the same thing. It's not everybody's materialistic, and there's so many good people doing good things. It's the marketing of the, out there, buying up, monopolizing everything, buying up small businesses, everything. It's the monopolies that are separating people now. I wanted to know if you see that, Jenny, in your experience as well.
Yeah, I love that you see the commonality and see that we're all looking for the same thing. I completely agree with you, Doreen. I love that. And today, like Joanne had mentioned about me doing psychology, one of the things that I believe the way that you heal your mental health is through a spiritual connection. But one of my battles comes in working with people is this concept of materialism. And what I mean is materialism being the idea that only the tangible, only the physical is real, only the material is real. The supernatural isn't real, the soul isn't real. So when somebody, when I'm talking to someone about maybe, meditating, have a spiritual experience, through the lens of materialism, they're thinking that if they have, a feeling of calmness or whatever, it's just a bunch of chemicals producing an effect in a gray matter. That feeling of being close to God through the lens of materialism is nothing more than a chemical reaction in a physical vessel. And for them to be able to accept a non-materialistic perspective allows someone to say, oh, I was touched by the presence of God. And even in the context of our Urantia group, to accept that we have a thought adjuster, which is supernatural in and of itself, it's not of the physical world, requires us to step outside of materialistic perspective. The philosophy of materialism would deny a thought adjuster. So, the whole topic that's being debated in terms of the AI world is, what is consciousness? Is consciousness just what happens between neurons in this brain? Well, if so, then we can upload consciousness to a cloud after you die, to a, internet cloud, and you'll be able to have immortality through technology. And that's what they're believing. They're believing that all that you are is contained in this physical vessel. So a non-materialistic view would say, no, there's a soul, there's a spirit, there's a thought adjuster, there's all of that goes beyond the grave. And that's the essence of who I am and my connection to God, that we're tethered to something higher. And there's an order underneath the chaos,
Thanks, Jen. Yeah, and the missing element, obviously, in a lot of people who get caught up in this, is the personal, right? You can have all these God discussions, very impersonal, but you need to keep, and that's what the Urantia book does, right? It's not just all these fantastic universes and everything, but it's that personal connection, and that you can't, well, we know it, but like you said, it's something. There's a new Frankenstein movie out, by the way. I don't know how it ends on these questions, but we don't learn our lesson, right? That's another good example. Jan.
One thing which is very important here is to keep words of Urantia book stable and not smeared by any artificial intelligence. I was looking for some answers I get from people using artificial intelligence, but when I start studying in 70s, the computer have size of the building, and the basic words was trash in to the computer, you get trash out.
Right.
That means whenever your artificial intelligence is telling you, it was put in by people, and you have to remember all of it.
You know, what you point out is the Urantia book in and of itself is the revelation for us today. All the problems that we're dealing with in terms of, you know, needing to understand science, but also in a you know, in a spiritual context, it's all laid out in the Urantia book, you know, and I understand that people don't necessarily always read today, but there's ways to hear it through audio and so forth. But most importantly, as you know, your Joanne and your work at the foundation is helping foster these educational opportunities and study groups. Because when we get to talk about what's in the Urantia book, then it becomes alive and then it becomes real. And I am so grateful for the Urantia book because it answers all of these questions and it brings all of this together in a way that nothing else does. I mean, it is a revelation for us today, 100%.
And I think it changes your perspective, right? I'm sure it's happened to everybody. You start out with the most illogical premise ever, that there's this book that somehow, you know, came to us, and then you read it, and then you do see where it explains, and then you end up believing, no, that actually is the most logical thing I've ever heard. Which, you know, it and the facts didn't change, but the way you're processing them did. Halbert?
Would you comment on the issue of outreach, Urantia book outreach, to people who are more disposed to this secular, materialistic, scientific view of life, with regard to the way new discoveries and scientific advances are catching up to the Urantia book? And I ask this question in the context of having gotten a lot of years of pushback from the Urantia community that doing this type of outreach isn't spiritual enough and it's not Jesus focused enough. And it seems to me it's reaching people where they're at, and you know, that's important for outreach purposes, is not to project our own already faithful attitude, you know, into the conversation, but to try to really get sensitive to, you know, reaching people with the values that they have. Could you make some comments on that?
That's where I really applaud Joanne because she has been spearheading like all sorts of things from the science symposium to uh, you know, what we're doing right today. You know, she has been really bringing forth a lot of those different opportunities. I think that those things are happening, and you know, the Urantia book is it's something that in some sense has defined you. I mean, outreach is good, but it's not necessarily the most easy book to always read, you know? So, anyway, but what were you going to say, Tim?
Oh, well, I was about Atlanta, but I was just going to say, you know, there's many seeds, lots of different soils, right? So, you know, I think somebody mentioned the thought adjuster, but we haven't worshipped, we haven't sung songs, we haven't lit candles, we haven't meditated. I bet you there's some other Zoom we could all be on where we're doing that, right? And if that's what people are attracted to, and that's their entree into the book, that's awesome, right? But there's also just the discussions like this. Hey, let's look at Isaac Newton and his philosophy of the world. Hey, let's look at scientific discoveries. Let's look at alternative explanations. Let's look at modern secularism. So, you know, nobody has a monopoly. Nobody knows what's going to work. And if you come to someone and say, I'm going to change what you believe, they're going to say, no, you're not. If you come and say, let me tell you this weird story or this interesting story, yeah, you don't have to believe in Star Wars to enjoy it, right? You don't have to. There's a lot of people get into the book in these ways that, oh, wow, look at this, talks about ancient civilizations and stuff. And then it's over. The revelators do the rest of the work. We don't have to do anything. But
For
Joanne,
sure.
yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate those thoughts, Jenny, because I've often felt that science, you know, is a way for me, it's about common ground and where are we interconnected. And if you can find the overlay, that's half the battle. And that's why I've always loved your website, Halbert, because, you explore topics on there that someone who doesn't read the Urantia book could appreciate and say, oh, well, that's very interesting. And so I just believe that, I first heard of the book during a discussion about space respiration. I'm not even a scientist, but we happen to be talking about that. And it's like, what? What was that book you mentioned? And so you just never know when somebody's going to stumble across it, and then it can just change your whole life.
People who believe something like institutional church, even the priest itself, they serve whole life, and now something is telling them they were wrong. It's the same with the scientists. If they were grown in believing that 2 + 2 is 4, and maybe not so, or the water H2O, but it's really H2 and 1.5, or maybe anyway. Fear is very important thing, keeping people in their thoughts. That means that's why it's so many secular people, because they rather believe something which were told that somebody checked for them. They're sure it's like that. No question. Don't ask.
Right. Thanks. Yeah. And there's a lot of scientists who want to believe in whatever they wrote in their last paper and not anything else. Right.
Yeah.
But at least science, in theory, the philosophy of it does have within it the mechanism of change is the whole point. Right. So it is flexible and will eventually has a self-correction that only very few religions admit of continuing evolution of revelation, and that gets easily out of control too, right? So it's all these institutions have natural sort of growth rates, religion being a very conservative one, science being a much more aggressive one. So there's hope, right? Fear not. Okay, Jenny, thank you so much. And thank you all for coming, for listening, and for participating. Those of you who did, it's a great discussion. Really enjoyed it.